Coming up on today's show, we'll take a look ahead to the matchup between two 8-7 teams at Lumen Field this Sunday. The Steelers coming in to visit the Seahawks. I'll be talking to Jeff Hartman of the Steel Curtain Network, go behind enemy lines, as it were. Find out where the Steelers stand as they have struggled a bit in this second half. They are on the outside looking in for an AFC playoff spot, but still a chance to get into the playoffs. There is a lot on the line this Sunday between two very similar teams. I'll be talking Seahawks and Steelers with Jeff Hartman coming up today on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viennes.
If you would please, if you're watching on YouTube, like this video and subscribe to the channel so you always get notifications of new episodes, and also help support the channel if you like what I do. If you prefer audio podcasts, Seahawks Forever is available on all of the audio platforms. And if you prefer Spotify, or even if you don't, but you want to listen to audio episodes without ads, you can do that for just 99 cents a month right now. You can subscribe on Spotify. I will put that link in the description. And also, if you just want to support me and you like what I do, you can buy me a coffee or a beer at buymeacoffee.com. Shout out to Josh this week. Bought 12 beers for me. Josh, I truly appreciate it. Thank you so much for supporting the show. I will put those to good use. Let's get to this Sunday's game. The Seahawks and Steelers, both 8-7. The Seahawks, if the playoffs started today, would be in. The Steelers would be out. On the outside looking in, things are a little bit more jumbled at the end of the playoff race in the AFC, but so many similarities between these two teams. Long tenured head coaches who like to build around running games and tough defense, but who have both struggled in those two areas this year, who have gotten inconsistent play on offense this year, whose fan bases have grown restless with their head coaches and don't think that they're performing at the level that as fans they would like to see. They have had to rely on their backup quarterbacks to come in and win a game or two this year in order to keep them alive in the playoff race. So much to get to. And when I say that I'm speaking with Jeff Hartman today, technically he asked me to be on his show today, but he allowed for a little back and forth. I was able to ask him some questions as well and get some insight from him. And so let's get to that. This is the conversation that I had just moments ago with Jeff Hartman of the Steel Curtain Network looking at this Sunday's game.
All right, folks, it is time for another Behind Enemy Lines segment here on the Friday morning show on the Let's Ride podcast. And I'm excited to have Dan Viennes on from the Seahawks Forever podcast to talk about Week 17 opponent for the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Seattle Seahawks. Dan, welcome to the show. How's it going?
It's going good. Thanks for having me on, Jeff. We've been chatting about this for a while, or about some other things, and following each other on Twitter. So it's good to finally get together for a good reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of those contests where there is some history between these two teams. I mean, you talk about Super Bowl 40. I know Seattle fans still like to talk about Super Bowl 40. But nonetheless, there's some history also within the current roster and former Steelers that are there. But I do want to ask about Super Bowl 40 before we get started. I'm not going to bring up the game and talk about specific plays or anything like that. But from the fan perspective, like when the Seahawk fan hears anything about the Steelers, the response is what?
Refs, calls. I mean, that's it. And I'm glad you brought it up because I was going to anyway, just kind of as to give some context to your listeners and viewers. It's I'm one of those rare ones. I'm in the minority that from the day that game happened, I've never blamed it on the refs. The Seahawks lost that game completely on their own. It really came down to a badly blown coverage on a trick play and a horrendous interception from Matt Hasselbeck when we were driving late with a chance to take the lead. And, you know, the detractors will say, yeah, but that interception came after the holding call on Sean Locklear on the throw to Jeremy Stevens down at the 1. And so one led to the other. It's still, even with some of the things we were up against in that game and losing our Marquand Manuel as our starting safety certainly didn't help during the game, but we lost that game all on our own. It doesn't make it that much easier to accept. But I think it's ridiculous to blame that game on the refs. And also while I'm at it, like the offensive PI call against Daryl Taylor or Daryl Taylor is on our current roster. But it absolutely was the right call. It doesn't get called all the time, but that doesn't mean it wasn't a penalty. So Seahawks fans, if they're listening to this, can just need to finally put that to bed.
And since then, they have won a Super Bowl, so that might lessen the blow a little bit. It's not like they're the Browns who have never even won one, but that's neither here nor there. Let's talk about.
And also, we have since then acquired another Super Bowl loss that is much more painful. And so
I'm not going to get into that one.
Makes it easier to forget Super Bowl 40. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about this upcoming game, Week 17. I find it very intriguing for so many reasons. Both of these teams are still clinging to playoff hopes. The Seattle approach, I think they're, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not as keen on the NFC as I am the AFC. Their road to the postseason is much more cleaner than Pittsburgh's. Pittsburgh's got to win out, and they need some help. But still, 8-7, there's been some good, there's been some bad this season. In terms of where you feel the team is heading in terms of trajectory, Mike Tomlin loves to talk about their arrow is pointing up or down. Where is the arrow pointing for the Seahawks heading into Week 17, in your opinion?
I think the most frustrating part about following, covering, rooting for the Seahawks this year has been that arrow has just been flatline. It's just been heading horizontally. It's a team that doesn't feel like it's as good as the sum of its parts should be, at least that most of us feel it should be. That the pieces are there, that the roster's talented. It's pretty balanced. It's young. There's some dynamic talent there. But they just it hasn't all come together. And that's not really like what we're used to seeing from a Pete Carroll coached team. They typically get better as the season goes along. And that doesn't seem to be happening. Maybe it is. And that's why I'm so intrigued by this matchup Sunday, because, coming out of that really, really tough 4-game stretch that the Seahawks had against the best in the NFC, and they've strung together a couple of wins now, and you get tantalized by the little bits and pieces that you see. But if this team wants to have any confidence going into the playoffs, if they make the playoffs, that they could do some damage, we need to see a clean game. We need to see one complete performance against either the Steelers or the Cardinals, preferably both, obviously. And so that's the frustrating thing here in Seattle, is we just haven't seemed to get over the hump and put all the pieces together on defense and offense. And I'm intrigued by this game too, because the closer I look at it, the harder I look at it, there's just a ton of similarities, an incredible amount of parallels between the paths these two teams are on. So I can't wait to get to Sunday.
Well, if you're talking about parallels, are the Seahawks on offense as boring as the Steelers are on offense? Because the Steelers have only put up over 30 points one time this year, and it happened last week against the Bengals at home with, guess who? Mason Rudolph at quarterback. Right. So not really headline stuff there, but is the offense of the Seahawks, how are they looking? Is Geno Smith back to full health? Like what's the deal there? Yeah,
Steeler fans must be kind of wondering if they really saw what they saw on Sunday, right? Yeah. After just explosive plays all over the field in that one, where were those, right? I guess they were sitting on the bench, maybe on the end of the quarterback room. Seahawks have been different in that I wouldn't say it's ever boring. It just it seems dysfunctional at times, and it seems disconnected at times. We're used to seeing, Pete Carroll football teams be able to run the football consistently. And they've invested a ton in running backs the last couple of years and in offensive line. And it just hasn't come together this year. We see teases. We see a play here or there, or a quarter here or there, but we haven't seen a complete game where the run game has really dictated things. When we do see it, then it all seems to work better, such as in the third quarter, especially, but in the second half against the Eagles. They were able to kind of dictate terms, be physical, and own the line of scrimmage. And we haven't seen that enough this year. When that's happening, then everything else seems to work in sync, which, I'm not reinventing the wheel here. That's probably the case for most teams in the NFL. But the frustrating part from our end of when the Geno Smith injury occurred is after some early season struggles, it really seemed like he had found something, and some things were clicking for him. He was playing exceptionally well. hopefully what we saw in the second half against the Titans, certainly in that game-winning drive, will carry over, because for whatever other people around the country might think may have been a quarterback controversy here because Drew Lock pulled off that win on Monday Night Football against the Eagles, we never felt like there was one here. Gino's the guy, and certainly if we're going to get into the playoffs and do any damage, he needs to be playing well.
Yeah, and when I think of Seattle, and I think they have a tremendous receiving core with Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and Smith and Jigba, like a really good top three, in my opinion. Everyone always thinks about defense, and it's probably the Legion of Boom era and all the great defensive units they've had there. But I don't know much about this current defense. I'm asking you because, well, Steelers don't play NFC West too often. What's the defense for Seattle looking like?
Not good. That's really been the storyline of the season is they were so bad last year, particularly against the run. And then the pass rush has been so inconsistent that they completely changed over their defensive line personnel in this offseason. And got rid of everyone that was here, brought in a whole new crew, went out and handed out the largest free agent contract they've ever handed out to Draymond Jones, drafted a couple defensive linemen, brought Jaron Reed back, Mario Edwards, and just completely changed that group. And then brought Bobby Wagner back into the fold in particular to try to address the run defense. We were excited about the young cornerbacks, the young secondary talent. There was some enthusiasm about Jamal Adams potentially coming back from injury this year. So there was a lot of positive vibes around this team the first couple months of the season. And it looked early on like the defense was improved. And then Uchenna Nwosu went down. And then teams seemed to start figuring out how to attack us. And it's been better the last couple of weeks, but it still hasn't been good. They're a little too easy to run the football against. They play a lot of zone coverage that most of us feel like isn't aggressive enough. Teams can move the football against the Seahawks. It's been frustrating. Now, that being said, Jamal Adams has been out the last couple of weeks and things have gotten better. So I'll let you kind of do the math.
I have to, since we're talking about defense, I have to ask you about two former Steelers that the Steelers could be seeing big time this Sunday is Artie Burns, which I didn't even know he's still in the league, and Devon Bush, of course, very familiar with him. And I have to say this, I used to work for SB Nation, and when Devon Bush was sold, fifth-year option was not being picked up, and he was going to be a free agent. When he signed with Seattle, I was asked 5 questions from an opposing editor. I'm not with them anymore. I'm not with Vox Media at all. But when I asked them, they kept on asking questions. You have first-round pick, top 10 pick. Yes, all those things are true. But I painted a picture of a guy who's not the same athlete that he was when he was drafted out of Michigan in 2019. He's not the same player since he tore up his knee. And I was said, oh, you are just mad that you let him go. Like, no, they had contractual options for him, and they chose not to take them. And there was a reason why. I don't know if Devon Bush has done much of anything. Has he for Seattle? I think I looked at his stat line. It was pretty mundane, as if he doesn't see the field very often.
Yeah, it's been an unusual year, very up and down. There have been weeks where he's been a healthy scratch just because, first of all, when he was brought in, it was primarily as a hedge against Jordan Brooks not being 100% to start the season, coming off a former first-round draft pick, coming off an ACL injury. I know there's been advancements in medicine, but it was unbelievable to see him not only out there for week 1, but without a knee brace, running full speed. And until he re-injured his ankle this week against Tennessee, I think was playing the best football of his career. It was remarkable. So that took away some opportunities for Devon Bush. And then there were times where the Seahawks, who primarily now are a 3-4 team, they've kind of transitioned the last couple of years. So they mostly only play with 2 down linebackers. There were times, though, against certain teams, and this last Sunday in Tennessee was one of them, where Devon Bush started the game alongside Jordan Brooks and Bobby Wagner, and they went to more 4-3 stuff in obvious rundowns. So it's been very hit and miss based on that week's game plan. When he has played, he's been fine. I mean, he's better than any other linebacker they have on the roster. He's better than John Radigan or Patrick O'Connell or Drake Thomas, who some promising young guys, but he hasn't been a liability, certainly. After Brooks went down Sunday, he seems, to be moving fine. He seems to be, sideline to sideline. And I'm not as familiar with his career in Pittsburgh, obviously, as you are, but I do know that he had a dynamic rookie year. And before the injury, he was an explosive player. His Michigan tape is phenomenal. It's so much fun to watch. He's not that player, but I think he's fine. He's on a 1-year deal. He's a guy that'll probably spend the rest of his career. It kind of feels like doing that. And maybe there's even an opportunity for him to come back to Seattle again next year, because Bobby has said he's going to be year to year, and it kind of feels like this might be the last one. And Jordan Brooks' contract status is up in the air too. They declined his 5th-year option after he was hurt. So, but we may find out a lot more this weekend, because it sure doesn't seem like Brooks is going to play. And so Devon Bush would be in line to start next to Bobby. That's
really interesting. Now, you had told me before we came on the air, you had some questions for me, for your listeners out there, that you're going to repurpose this audio. Do you have anything on the top of your head that you want to pick my brain about?
Yeah, I mean, primarily, I want to know how you feel about the quarterback situation, because from afar, first of all, it's such an interesting quarterback room. It might be the deepest quarterback room in the league, but are any of these guys franchise quarterbacks? You know, the old saying that if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
I guess that applies even more when you have 3. You have, 2 first-round draft picks, and what was Mason Rudolph, a 2nd or a 3rd? I mean,
third. They got him in the 3rd, 2018.
Yeah. After a prolific college career at Oklahoma State. It's and there was a time where he was thought of as the heir apparent to Ben Roethlisberger at one time, correct? Mm-hmm. I've never been a huge Kenny Pickett fan. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just a perception thing, because the gloves. I mean, I know he's got the small hands. It just doesn't feel like he has an electric or a dynamic arm to play at this level, but he has his moments. My thought is, when I saw, there was a report last week that he was in line to start this week. Now it seems more uncertain. Is that because of Rudolph's performance Sunday and they're not sure? Where do you stand on the quarterback? Which one would you prefer to have out there on Sunday?
I think that you have to go with the hot hand, if that's what you want to call it. You put up 30 points for the first time since, I think, they had the best offensive performance since almost 2017. And that's how, I mean, you have to go back to like Ben Roethlisberger's in his prime. We're not talking 2020 Ben Roethlisberger in the waning years of his career. But it's been a rough stretch for quarterback play since Roethlisberger hung it up. And the Steelers are still like, maybe deep, but it's deep with mediocrity. Like, none of these guys are going to light the world on fire. You just hope that you're putting out the best player to give your team the best chance to win. And I think you can't underscore the fact that Kenny Pickett was limited all last week. Some quarterbacks, like I mentioned, Roethlisberger, are good enough to not practice and still be able to get in there and play. Kenny Pickett is in his 2nd year. He's not that guy yet. He still needs to practice throughout the week. So unless there's been some improvement, and I said this to all the Steelers fans that wanted to listen, the fact that he wasn't even dressed, he was inactive on Sunday. He wasn't the quarterback 3 emergency, only break the glass if an emergency. He wasn't even that. So that told me before Mason Rudolph put up 34 points, threw for 2 touchdowns and all that fun stuff, which was a lot of fun to watch. He wasn't there, Kenny Pickett. He wasn't there from a health standpoint. So when Mike Tomlin said on Tuesday, Mason's our guy, we'll see how the week goes with Kenny. My hope is that Kenny Pickett is QB2 in the game. Mason gets to start. That's what I think.
I mean, it certainly appears that he might have unlocked George Pickens' ceiling. I mean, after a kind of a weird season for Pickens, and then there was the whole controversy the week before with the, making the business decision on not blocking and that whole thing. Talk about coming back from that in a strong way. And then I wanted to ask you about the running game, because that has been the Achilles heel of the Seahawks this year, at least since Nwosu's injury. A couple of good backs there, Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. But it looks like, nothing pops off the page. It looks like it's been a little inconsistent. What's the state of the running game there?
So if you go back prior to the Bengals win on Saturday last week, they had that 3-game losing streak to Arizona Cardinals, New England Patriots, and the Indianapolis Colts. And in none of those games did they ever have a consistent running game. When the Steelers can run the ball, and against Cincinnati, they didn't blow the doors off the Bengals in the ground game. They ran for 113, averaging 3.8 yards per carry. That's not earth-shattering. Those aren't earth-shattering numbers. However, they were able to run it well enough that it kept everything in balance, and they ran it well in the second half when they're just trying to kill the clock because you're up 34-11. So The Steelers, when they can run the ball, is when they have success because they're not going to have to rely on their quarterback play, which is a bunch of mediocrity, in my opinion. So they're going to come into Seattle and they're going to try and run the ball. And if they have success, it's going to be the best way to set up the team, both offensively and defensively, for them to be able to do what they want, control the clock, control the time of possession, and hopefully leave with a win, keeping their playoff hopes alive. We'll see if they can do it, though.
And then I wanted to ask you about the defense, because when we think of the Pittsburgh Steelers, traditionally, we think of really, hard-nosed, physical defenses that usually rank in the top third of the league. This year, in a lot of key statistics, they're kind of middle of the pack. And in some, yards per game metrics, they're top of the bottom third. We're not used to seeing that. Yet TJ Watt has 17 sacks?
17
on the season. Highsmith's got another 7 or 8. Like, those pieces are still there. What has it been that's kind of kept the defense from living up to past Steelers standards?
I honestly think that Mike Tomlin, who's a defensive guy, obviously, he's looked at this team when they constructed the roster through free agency and the draft, which they had a great draft this year, but they're young. Those guys are young, and Joey Porter Jr. is coming into his own. But you're asking Patrick Peterson to be a fixture in the secondary. Like, he's at the waning years of his career. Like, you can't ask him to be the Patrick Peterson of 2015 even. And so I think he said, we're going to build a defense that is bend, don't break. Like, we are going to be an opportunistic group. We're going to rely on the big play. So TJ Watt is a big part of that in his pass pressure. And again, like I talked about the running game for the offense on defense, it is the ability to take the ball away. I just talked about this on my Wednesday podcast. The Steelers they're tied for first in turnover differential of +10. So when they take the ball away and they win that differential, they've only lost one game in that regard. When they lose the differential, they've lost every single time. So it's one of those situations where the Steelers, when they can get the ball back to that offense, even though they might need a couple extra possessions, that's the recipe for them to win. And so they're going to rely on Highsmith and Watt to, if not get to the quarterback, maybe a hurried throw, an errant throw. And they've done it themselves. I mean, they've scored touchdowns themselves. And Highsmith came up with a beautiful interception last week of Jake Browning. So they're capable. But the defense is bend, don't break. They're going to give up the yards. And it's almost as if they've said, that's fine. As long as we keep you out of the end zone and hold you to field goals and not touchdowns, that's where they want to thrive. And they have done that for the most part. And when the offense has responded even a little bit, it's equated in victories. We'll put it that way.
Is Mink going to be good to go?
I'm not sure. He says he's going to be limited this week. I would say no, but it's early for that. We'll see. We will see, but I don't know. I want to ask you quickly before we end this segment here, current line, Steelers are getting 3.5 on the road and a total of 41.5. I don't need a score prediction. I'm just asking you how you think the game's going to play out.
God, it's so hard to tell with these two teams. I want to say, I think there's a good chance it would be the under, that it would be a similar game to what we saw the Seahawks play in Tennessee this weekend, where it's kind of ugly, kind of a mutter type game. It's supposed to be some rain Sunday, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be significant rain. I don't think it's going to impact the game all that much, but it just feels like both these teams have had a hard time really dialing in what they want to do on offense. And on defense, they can, Seahawks are built the same way. They're much better in the red zone than they are between the 20s. And although they give up more points than the Steelers do or have this year, I can see it being one of those ugly games, similar to what the Seahawks have played the last couple of weeks, that comes down to the fourth quarter. I just don't see either of these teams coming out and dominating the other, because that's not what we've seen this year.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Well, Dan, I want to give you an opportunity to plug social media, websites, anything that you're doing right now that you might want to draw attention to. Go ahead, do that now.
I appreciate that. On Twitter at Seahawks Forever, if you want to follow me there and get in on some debate and some discourse. And then Seahawks Forever, the podcast, available on all the audio platforms wherever you listen to podcasts, and also the Seahawks Forever YouTube page. You can watch the video versions over there.
There you go. Dan, thank you for your time. Enjoy the game. Hopefully I'll be talking to you soon. Take it easy.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate having me on. All right. That was cool talking to Jeff. Appreciate him having me on the show and allowing me to ask some questions back at him. Again, I'm just fascinated by this matchup. I'm not scared by it. I have no illusions or expectations. I mean this, if you've been following this Seahawks team this year, and that's a dumb thing to say, certainly you have been because you're watching this show, you can't hang your hat on anything with these Seahawks, right? They could come out and lay a turd on Sunday, or they could do what we hope that they'll do, and we've been waiting for them to do over the last 6 weeks, and we see it in fits and starts, and put it all together at home in an important game against an opponent who's in the exact same situation as them, or very similar situation. Hopefully Devin Witherspoon will be back, and that'll give the defense a spark as well. Stick around and stay tuned to the show. Make sure you subscribe on all the platforms. I may do something before next week's show. I have some things in mind, but we'll see if I get to them. It's a busy time of year for me outside of content creation. But regardless, either way, I will react to the game shortly thereafter or on New Year's Day. So if we don't talk again until after that, have a wonderful, safe, happy New Year. Hope your holidays are treating you well. And we'll see you soon. Forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching.